suburban family, volunteering with school and church activities. He went to work on the morning of September the 11th, 2001, a gorgeous, warm autumn day, and life was truly good. But at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the north side of his building, World Trade Center 1. And in that moment, his life changed forever. And while he escaped with only minor injuries, which would soon heal, he was left with psychological injuries which would last a lifetime. That day, he lost more than 100 colleagues and friends who had worked with him for most of his career, colleagues around his same age, also with young families. This left him with the haunting question, why me? He says that every joyous occasion in his life since and forever will be tinged with the guilt, why me? Today, he and his wife, Roxanne, and their children, Nicholas, Brianna, and Samantha, live in Safety Harbor. Today, he works with the Edwards Group and also owns Safe Surface Solutions in Palm Harbor. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Michael Finio.
Morning, everybody. I can't begin to tell you what an extraordinary honor it is for me to be here today with you. Why me? Why me is a question often posed to God by people forced to endure hardships. But ironically, it's the very same question often asked by people who survive a catastrophe while others die. September 11th, 2001 was a gorgeous, sunny, warm autumn Tuesday. I took the Long Island Railroad to Manhattan, got on the E train downtown to the World Trade Center. I worked for a brokerage firm called Garban Intercapital. Today they're known as ICAP. I arrived at my desk on the 25th floor at about 7:15. It was a typical day in every sense of the word. Then at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into my building. I was knocked out of my chair. I remember seeing colleagues who were standing, struggling to catch their balance. About 30 seconds later, there was a second explosion. As was later explained to us, a fireball of jet fuel was jettisoned down the elevator shafts, and when it reached the lobby, exploded. Many people left immediately. I and others did not. We never lost power. The lights were still on, phones were still ringing, monitors and TVs were on. I didn't feel a great sense of urgency right away. I thought there may have been an accident at the restaurant, Windows on the World, on the 107th floor. My concept of time is very blurred, but at some point soon thereafter, a colleague came through the trading floor urging everybody to leave immediately. I decided to leave. I ran around the front of my desk, and for some reason, I chose to run back to my desk. And I tripped on the floor, landed flush on my knee, and I broke a bone in my knee. But fortunately, at that time, I felt no pain. I proceeded to go into the kitchen galley. I don't know why. And there I found a colleague. He was emptying milk containers and filling them with water. And he said, I was here in '93 when something like this happened. He lifted my arm, put a stack of napkins under my arm, handed me a container of water, and he said, if the stairs get smoky, wet the napkin. This way folks can put it over their mouths and it'll filter the air. So I did as he said, and I headed for the stairs, followed by my boss and a few others. The main set of stairs was huge, easily fit 3 or 4 side by side, shoulder to shoulder. But when we got to the door to get on those stairs, we couldn't get in. It was packed. Another colleague was down the hall, and he called us to follow him. He knew an alternate stairwell that we didn't even know existed. We got in there. It was less crowded. It was smaller, but we were able to begin our descent. At this point, nobody had any idea what had happened. And again, there really wasn't a great sense of urgency. Guys were actually having lighthearted conversations, talking about going and playing around a golf, and we'll come back in tomorrow when the fire department gets up there and puts it out and takes care of it. But then, when we reached the 16th floor, Tower 2 got hit. And we heard that, and we felt that. And at that moment, we knew this wasn't an accident. The stairwell went silent, and fear started to settle in. I remember I tried to pray, but I couldn't remember a word of a prayer from all that I've said over the years. So I just begged God for his help. People continued to file in, and the stairwell got more crowded and slower moving. When we reached the 12th floor, we heard shouts from below to leave the stairs. It was the fire department on their way up. Someone behind me opened the door to the 12th floor, and smoke started billowing in, so the door was closed immediately. There was no way we could get off those stairs. I remember leaning against the person next to me and pulling myself into the handrail as the fire department started passing us. I remember thinking, these guys are all my age. They were young, they were sweating, they were carrying their gear, and their eyes were huge. They knew what they were marching into. Once they passed us, the stairway opened up. A friend of mine and I carried an older gentleman down the rest of the way. He had asthma and left his meds on his desk. And at this point, the stairs were flooded from the sprinkler systems as well. When we got down to that last staircase, we could see daylight. And when we got down to the landing, ESU police came and grabbed that gentleman and took him off. And they were shouting, "Don't look." How could you not look? I remember looking at the windows. The windows on that mezzanine level were huge, and they were gone. They were all shattered. I remember looking up at the ceiling, and you could still see the building was completely unsteady and shaking. And then looking out into the area between the two towers, the only way to describe that was my mind could not believe what my eyes were seeing. It looked like a war zone. They directed us to the side of One World Trade to an open-air breezeway to 6 World Trade Center. 6 World Trade was a smaller building. At the time, it was the home of the U.S. Customs House. And there was a police officer holding us back, and another police officer in 6 World Trade looking up, waiting for clearing from falling debris and jumpers. We made our way to 6 World Trade and went through a pedestrian overpass over the West Side Highway into the World Financial Center. Went through the financial center and out onto a promenade on the Hudson River. And there we kind of gathered our thoughts, and it was the first time we were able to look back at what was happening. Both towers were completely engulfed in flames. I remember seeing desperate trapped victims in all the windows, and a sight that'll haunt me forever is watching jumpers. People on fire jumping. People holding hands jumping. The police ultimately came through the crowd, urging us all to leave. We headed right for the pier and boarded a ferry to New Jersey. Even though I lived on Long Island, I wanted off Manhattan. So we got on that ferry and we headed to New Jersey. And maybe a minute or two into our ride, we watched Tower 2 go down. And then Lower Manhattan disappeared from sight, completely covered in a thick cloud of dust. We got off that ferry and boarded an adjacent train to Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, where my boss lived. The next thing you know, I'm standing in this beautiful backyard on this gorgeous sunny day, wondering if this was really happening. And then it occurred to me that my wife, Roxanne, doesn't know if I'm okay. It took hours before I was finally able to get through. But when we finally heard each other's voice, we could barely talk. I told her I was okay, and then we just cried together. Roxanne and I were married in 1989. We had 3 children. Nicholas at the time was 9. Brianna was 5. And our baby Samantha was just 9 months. The next day I found a ride home, and when the car pulled up in front of my house, my emotions soared. Roxanne and the kids came running out to meet me, along with our parents and other relatives. My kids jumped into my arms, and hearing them say, "Daddy," was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Roxanne and I just sobbed as we embraced. I was overcome with gratitude to God and sheer joy at being reunited with my loved ones. I saw every aspect of my life as a precious treasure that I had been privileged enough to return to. But why me? Why was I granted such a blessing while so many others lost their lives and their loved ones? Why did God allow me to return to my family? I knew my colleagues loved their spouses and children as much as I loved mine, but so many never had that chance to see their families again. The next day, I drove Nicholas to school and then drove to church to attend Mass. As I walked to the church door, all my strength drained from my body. I literally needed to support myself on the pews as I pulled myself up to the front of the church. I collapsed in that front pew and cried harder than I have ever cried in my life. All my emotions, fear, joy, thankfulness, love, everything poured out, and guilt. I had been blessed beyond measure to be reunited with my family, but what about all the others? Roxanne joined me for Mass. We cried together the whole time. Our priest came to see us after Mass. I admitted that although I never wanted anything more in my life than to survive, now I struggle with the question, why me? What makes me so special? So many of my friends and colleagues died that day. They had young kids just like me. Why didn't they survive as I did? He said, that's something you don't need to know. God has plans for you. It's not meant for you to figure it out. just trust in God. His words brought me comfort, but my grief for the others was still tinged with guilt. Life gradually returned to normal, although it was never the same. A year and a half later, in April of '03, Roxanne was diagnosed with a brain tumor on her left optic nerve. A month later, on May 5th, she underwent surgery. Initially, her recovery looked good, but by the following day, her condition became critical. She was put in a medically controlled state and put on life support. A priest came to visit us in the hospital, and I admitted that I still carried a lot of guilt that I had survived while so many others did not. And he said, "Don't you see? Who would take care of Roxanne and the kids if you weren't here? Your family needs you. God still has work for you to do." As I stepped in and took over for my family, acceptance and understanding grew in me. Previously, I had mentally understood the reality of God's will, but now I was experiencing it on a deeper level. I was here because He still had a purpose for me in this world. It doesn't mean that those that died are not terribly missed, but it's His call. There will always be pain and loss beyond our understanding. I am a husband and a father here at God's bidding to love and serve those in my life. Roxanne eventually made a full recovery. Our trials have been our triumphs. Life's joys have since magnified. As for me, not a day goes by that I don't think about 9/11 to one extent or another. I would have never chosen to go through it, but I have grown because of it. Many people died on 9/11, and many more like me survived. Some of us have physical scars. We all have invisible wounds. I know survivors who never returned to work and never spoke a word about 9/11. Some changed their lives for the better, some for the worse, and some not at all. I think many, if not most, try to distance themselves from those painful memories. No one way is the right way. To each his own. I chose to work toward doing something positive from having gone through this experience. I feel I personally owe that to those I knew well that died. By no means is this a comparison, but I feel the survivor guilt that haunts me, haunts many of you here today as well. Now, when I ask myself, why me? I'll never completely know why the good Lord spared my life that day. But I feel I understand more today than I did 12 years ago. It's all in God's plan. I've had the privilege of sharing my story a number of times over the years. Being here today and sharing my story with you for this purpose is an honor that I could not adequately express with words. But let me say to all the heroes here today, to all those represented by that table, to all that served before 9/11 and since, to all those serving today, to all law enforcement officers, firefighters, and all of our first responders, thank you and your families so much for your courage, for your self-sacrifice, and for dedicating your lives to the protection and safety of our nation. May we never forget 9/11. Thank you, and God bless you all.
At this very time, 12 years ago, the attacks upon our country had begun. The planes had been hijacked. They were in the air. In the next 90 minutes, the attacks on the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the skies in Pennsylvania would claim the lives of nearly 3,000 innocent men, women, and children. In those 90 minutes, the most powerful country in the world would suffer a horrible blow, making it the bloodiest day on American soil since the Civil War. America would be knocked to her knees, but not for long. She stood up, taller than ever, and her flags were raised higher than ever before. Did the terrorists forget that we are the people who fought at Yorktown, Bunker Hill, Midway, the Battle of the Bulge, Iwo Jima? However, as one terrorist who hid in Pakistan eventually would learn, we did not forget. We did not forget, and we will never forget those who perished on that fateful day, 9/11/01. But now it's time for prayer. Leading us in prayer for the fallen of that day is the chaplain of the Medal of Honor Society, Mr. Gary Bikert.
I'm humbled at this time to have been asked to lead us in prayer as we bring our hearts, our hurts, and our hopes to God. Would you please join me in a word of prayer? Our Father, this morning has been a time to remember, to honor, and to support one another. And Lord, we have come here to remember the tragic events of September 11th. And for many, there is still much pain, hurt, and grief that comes with remembering. Yet we must remember and never forget. For as many of us know, forgetting does not make us better, nor does it bring us healing. It is only you, Father, who can bring true healing. So we look to you at this time, and as we remember, we ask that you give us the comfort for our hurt and for our grief. As we look to you, may we continue to heal, and with this healing, may we find a new strength, a strength to continue in our resolve and our commitment to this great nation and the freedoms that we enjoy. May we find a strength to rise up and walk together as a people, as one nation under God. And Father, as we walk, may we walk with honor as we remember the many selfless acts of bravery and sacrifice that were done and the lives that were lost on that day. as well as the thousands of lives that have been lost since in Iraq and Afghanistan. These were men and women who believed not only with their heart, but with their lives as well, that there's something more important in this life, worth living for, worth dying for, something more important